No, she's just a guest. A coward who abandoned her unit and ran. My father's voice cut straight through the soft jazz of the engagement party. He did not even look at me as he introduced me to my sister's fiancé, a Navy SEAL commander. My father jutted his chin, gesturing with his wineglass toward me like I was some kind of disgusting stain on his expensive rug. Best not to pay her any mind, Ethan. He added, twisting the knife while my sister's friends hid their smirks behind their hands. Irresponsible trash like her, the military was right to kick her to the curb. This flesh has caught shrapnel in Fallujah, but the cold casual sarcasm from my own flesh and blood tore through my chest worse than any bullet. The SEAL commander did not smile. He stepped forward politely, offering his hand. But the exact second his fingers grazed mine, accidentally brushing against the pale, jagged scar on my wrist, his entire body locked up. His breath hitched. His head snapped up, eyes locking onto mine, his voice trembling as he stuttered. Before I tell you what happened, take a second to like and subscribe, but only if this story hits close to home. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? To understand why that SEAL commander's fingers froze on my wrist in the middle of a crowded room, you have to rewind exactly 48 hours, the exact moment my tires crushed the gravel driveway. I parked my beat-up V8 SUV in front of a pristine white clapboard house on the Mendocino coast. 6 years of continuous combat deployments. 6 years of breathing sand, sweat, and copper. I killed the engine. The silence of the coastal fog felt heavy. I stepped out, grabbing my frayed tactical duffel bag from the passenger seat. Arthur Butler, the man I was supposed to call Dad, stood on the front porch. He wore a brand new cashmere sweater, the kind that costs more than a standard-issue rifle. There were no open arms, not a single step forward. His eyes did a slow clinical sweep. He took in the dried mud flaking off my boots. He looked at the faded sun-bleached patches on my jacket. He pointed a stiff finger toward the narrow weed-choked path wrapping around the side of the house. "Use the back door," he ordered. His tone was flat. "Your mother just put down new carpet to impress the in-laws. Do not track that bare extension here." I gripped the canvas strap of my bag. I did not argue. I walked around the house, gravel crunching under my boots, barred from the front door of my own home like a stray dog. I pushed through the back door. The kitchen smelled sharply of lemon bleach and roasting meat. Clarabelle stood by the marble island. She wore a cream silk dress that draped perfectly over her frame. On her left ring finger sat a blinding, oversized diamond. She stepped forward and hugged me. It was a perfectly calculated maneuver. She leaned her neck in, keeping her shoulders pulled back, maintaining exactly 6 inches of airspace so her expensive silk would not brush against my jacket. The second she pulled away, the fake smile vanished. She dropped her voice to a harsh hiss. "Ethan's family is coming for dinner tonight. Do not bring up your bloody military garbage. We are cultured people. Just sit quietly in the corner, keep your mouth shut, and clean up the plates when we finish." She spun around. Her designer heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor as she walked away. I dropped my heavy duffel bag in the corner of the kitchen. My eyes tracked the diamond on her hand. The way the overhead lights caught that stone reflected the exact amount of combat hazard pay I'd wired home 4 years ago. Money earned dragging bleeding Marines out of a kill zone. She was wearing my survival on her finger. I walked upstairs and pushed open the door to my old bedroom. There was no bed. They had knocked out the drywall, ripping out my childhood to convert the space into a massive walk-in closet for Clarabelle. Rows of designer clothes hung where my desk used to be. The smell of cheap wood and old books was replaced by cloying, heavy perfume. I kicked a stray shoebox out of the way to make room for my bag. The lid popped off. Underneath a layer of crumpled tissue paper, a thick stack of bank receipts spilled onto the floorboards. I crouched down. The cold from the floor seeped through my jeans. I picked up the top paper. My eyes scanned the faded black ink. It was a joint savings account statement. It had my name and my father's name on it from 10 years ago. This was the account where I deposited every single minimum wage paycheck I earned. 3 years of working double shifts at a greasy diner. 3 years of aching feet and burned hands to build my college fund. I looked at the withdrawal column. The paper showed a complete total drain. Balance 0. I checked the date of the transaction. It matched the exact week Clarabelle threw a massive crying fit in the living room, begging our father to buy out shares in a bankrupt boutique so she could play businesswoman. My father did not just borrow my future, he stole it to fund her delusion. I did not run downstairs screaming, I did not slam my fists on the kitchen island or demand justice. That kind of hysterical reaction is reserved for weak people who lose control of their perimeter. A soldier assesses the threat. I took the bank statement. I folded it into a small square, pressing the creases so hard my thumbs turned stark white. I slid the paper into the chest pocket of my field jacket. I zipped it shut. The metal zipper teeth locked together with a sharp snap. I did a slow visual sweep of the room. A shrine of luxury built entirely on my stolen blood and sweat. My jaw clamped tight. I turned on my heel and headed down the stairs, just as the front doorbell chimed. Ethan Maddox and his family had arrived. The execution dinner was officially starting. The bank statement sat flat against my chest, cold and heavy, waiting for the exact right second to detonate. The dining table was 10 feet of polished mahogany, covered in crisp white linen. Arthur Butler sat firmly at the head of the table, like a king holding court over his subjects. Clarabelle and Ethan occupied the center seats of honor. They were flanked by tall crystal wine glasses, silver gravy boats, and a massive bloody cut of roast beef. My chair was shoved into the absolute farthest corner of the room. I was seated so close to the swinging kitchen door that the brass hinges brushed my shoulder every time the hired help brought out a new dish. It was the exile seat. The spot specifically reserved for whoever was expected to stand up, shut their mouth, and clear the dirty plates. Arthur dominated the conversation. He poured expensive Cabernet and fed Ethan's parents a steady diet of sugar-coated garbage. Clarabelle has always known exactly what she wants out of life, Arthur said. He dragged a serrated steak knife through his thick cut of beef. Red juice pooled on his porcelain plate. He chewed, swallowing hard before flicking his eyes toward the dark corner of the table where I sat. She is incredibly stable, a born entrepreneur. Most importantly, she does not run away when things get difficult. Every word out of his mouth was a hollow-point bullet aimed right at my chest. Uncle Greg, a loud man who made a cheap living selling used cars 2 towns over, leaned heavily against the table. He pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up his sweaty nose and pointed his fork directly at my face. "Alicia!" Uncle Greg barked, chewing with his mouth open. "Still drifting around state lines? I thought the military kicked your ass to the curb years ago." The ambient noise in the dining room dropped dead. The scraping of silver against china ceased. Ethan looked up. His piece of meat hovered halfway to his mouth. Clarabelle did not miss a single beat. She casually dabbed the corner of her lips with a folded linen napkin. Her voice was smooth, practiced, and dripping with fake manufactured pity. "She abandoned her unit last year, Uncle Greg," Clarabelle said. She looked at Ethan's mother, playing the role of the tragic, embarrassed sister. She left her team behind in the sand to save her own skin. It is an open secret around town. She dropped the label of deserter right onto my lap in front of total strangers. In the military, that is a stain you do not wash off. Arthur took a slow, deliberate sip of his wine. He looked at the wall, endorsing the character assassination with his absolute silence. I looked down at my plate. I set my heavy steak knife down on the table. Clink! A single sharp piece of metal hitting the hard ceramic. It echoed in the dead air. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself. A trained soldier does not waste live ammunition shooting at cheap decoys. Instead, I pulled my shoulders back. I squared my posture, locking my spine straight as an iron rod. I lifted my chin, leaving 2 clear inches of dead air between my spine and the back of the wooden dining chair. I fixed my eyes on a blank spot on the wall, directly behind Arthur's head, entering a state of absolute, unbreakable stillness. My silence was thick, heavy, and suffocating. It slammed right into the middle of their pathetic lies. Ethan's parents stared at me with a sickening mixture of confusion and polite upper-class disgust. But Ethan Maddox did not. The Navy SEAL commander slowly lowered his hand. His fork hit his plate with a dull thud. He did not look at me with pity. His eyes shifted instantly. The polite civilian son-in-law vanished. He began a tactical target assessment. His dark eyes tracked my physical geometry. He analyzed my broad-braced shoulders. He noticed the rigid, controlled rhythm of my breathing. He looked down at my hands. They were resting flat and completely parallel on the white tablecloth. My knuckles were scarred, and the skin of my palms was covered in thick yellow calluses built by years of friction against nylon-repelling ropes and rifle grips. A coward who breaks under fire does not possess that kind of terrifying, cold-blooded composure under extreme social pressure. Ethan's jaw locked. The thick muscles in his neck pulled tight under his collar. He saw the math, and he knew the math they were feeding him was a complete lie. Arthur sensed the sudden drop in temperature. He forced a booming fake laugh from his chest. He reached for the wine bottle, attempting to shatter the tension. "Let us forget about the bad luck, son," Arthur yelled, raising his own glass high in the air. "Drink to Clarabelle. To the future." Ethan picked up his crystal glass, but he did not turn his head toward Clarabelle. He looked straight down the length of the long table. He looked directly at me. His eyes bored into my skull, searching for the bottom. I met his gaze dead on. I did not blink. I did not flinch or look away. Two distinct, heavy streams of combat-hardened hostility collided right over the roasted beef and the silver gravy boats. We were two apex predators sitting perfectly still at a table, surrounded by loud, oblivious prey. Ethan held my gaze. Slowly, deliberately, he gave a single, microscopic nod. It was a silent, invisible code. A transmission that only people who have walked through the fires of hell can translate. He lowered his hand. He set his full glass of red wine back onto the white linen tablecloth. He did not swallow a single drop. The hunter had caught the scent of blood, and he was getting ready to pull the trigger. The next afternoon, thick gray clouds swallowed the Mendocino coastline, blotting out the sun. The Pacific wind whipped across the jagged bluffs behind the house, carrying the harsh, stinging smell of salt water and rotting kelp. Clarabelle dragged Ethan out to the edge of the cliffs to take pictures before the formal engagement party tonight. I was ordered to tag along. My assigned mission was to act as her personal pack mule. I carried a heavy, oversized leather makeup bag so she could touch up her gloss between shots. I maintained a distance of exactly 30 paces. It is the standard safe interval for a sniper team moving through open terrain. From back here, I had a clear field of view, and I did not have to pretend to smile. Clarabelle stood mere inches from the dangerous drop-off, her back arched, holding her phone high in the air. She swiped furiously at the screen, completely absorbed in applying digital filters to her face. She ignored the ocean. She ignored the man she was supposed to marry. Ethan stood a few yards away, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his dark wool coat. He looked bored and incredibly out of place. The freezing coastal wind bit at his face, but he did not shiver. He watched Clarabelle pose for an invisible audience, the muscles in his jaw tight. Then he turned his back on her. He walked away from the edge, heading straight up the incline toward me. His heavy leather boots crushed the dry, dead grass. He moved with slow, calculated intent, the stride of a man used to pacing out distances in hostile territory. He stopped right beside my right shoulder, leaving exactly 2 feet of neutral space between us. He did not look at me. He kept his eyes locked on the churning gray water below. 2010, Ethan said. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble, nearly swallowed by the sound of the crashing waves. "Did you serve a rotation in Jordan?" It was a flawless interrogation tactic, a seemingly casual question asked without aggressive eye contact, designed to corner a target and cut off any route of escape. He was probing, testing a theory he had likely pieced together from classified after-action reports. My fingers clamped down hard on the leather handles of Clarabelle's makeup bag. The muscles in my forearms tightened like coiled springs. I stared straight ahead at the horizon. "I served at a lot of coordinates, Commander Maddox," I replied. My tone was flat, impenetrable. It is hard to keep track of them all. I deflected. I refused to hand over my military record to a man who was about to marry into Arthur Butler's house of lies. Ethan let out a short, dry exhale. It was not quite a laugh. It was the sound a man makes when he knows he is being lied to by a professional. He pivoted on his heel, turning his body to face me, directly, deliberately blocking the coastal wind with his broad shoulders. Right at that exact second, a massive, violent gust of wind ripped across the bluff. It caught the loose fabric of my field jacket. The draft blew my left sleeve violently upward, pushing the heavy canvas all the way past my elbow. My left wrist was completely exposed to the harsh daylight. Running horizontally across the pale skin of my forearm was a thick, brutal scar. It was not a clean surgical line. It was a jagged, raised mass of white tissue, chewed up and torn, resembling the broken teeth of a saw blade. It was the permanent physical receipt from a night in pure hell. The night a concrete building collapsed and I had to use my bare hands to drag a rusted, heavy-duty winch cable through burning rubble to pull 6 trapped Marines out of the kill zone. The steel fibers had shredded through my tactical gloves and sliced straight down to the bone. Ethan's eyes snapped down. His gaze locked onto my wrist like a laser targeting system. Every single micro-movement in his body froze. His breathing hitched, catching dead in his throat. His pupils contracted into tiny dark pinpricks. He recognized the texture of the damaged flesh. You do not get a scar like that from slipping in a kitchen. You do not get it from a civilian car crash. That specific mangled pattern belongs solely to industrial-grade military rescue cables tearing through human muscle under extreme tension. Before I could yank my sleeve down to hide it, a shrill, breathless voice broke the heavy tension. Aunt Alice was trudging up the dirt path behind us. She was rubbing her lower back, her face red from the steep climb, complaining loudly to no one in particular. Honestly, dragging us all out into this freezing cold. Aunt Alice whined, panting heavily. She stopped a few feet away, glaring angrily at Clarabelle's back, and then let a lethal slip of the tongue fall right out of her mouth. Acting like I do not know your father hid Alicia's combat medal in the attic. God forbid anyone overshadow precious Clarabelle on a holiday weekend. The wind seemed to stop dead. Clarabelle whipped around. Her expensive smartphone slipped, nearly tumbling out of her manicured fingers. The wind blew her hair across her face, revealing a mask of absolute, unfiltered panic. She realized Aunt Alice had just detonated a landmine. Clarabelle lunged forward, her high heels sinking deep into the coastal dirt. She waved her arms, desperate to shout over the old woman and change the subject before the damage was permanent. But she was too late. Ethan stood perfectly still on the dead grass. He slowly turned his head. He looked at Clarabelle. The polite, distant look of a tolerant fiancé was completely gone. His eyes were cold, hollow, and sharp as a straight razor. He looked at her, not as a future wife, but as a hostile entity. Then he slowly shifted his gaze back to me. He stared at the jagged white scar on my wrist and then looked directly into my eyes. The 10-year wall of lies Arthur and Clarabelle had built crumbled into dust inside the SEAL commander's mind. The truth was fully armed, ticking down and waiting to detonate at the engagement party tonight. The living room ceiling was blazing with the harsh light of 3 massive crystal chandeliers. The engagement party was drowning in the suffocating smell of heavy Chanel perfume, roasted garlic, and the constant high-pitched clinking of champagne flutes. I refused to stand in the center of the room. I retreated to the darkest corner by the balcony windows, pressing my shoulder blades flat against the cold plaster wall. From this angle, my blind spots were covered. I had a clear line of sight on every single moving body in the room. Clarabelle's friends clustered together barely 5 paces away. They kept throwing sideways glances in my direction, deliberately raising their voices over the jazz music. Look at her standing there like some kind of homeless carpenter. A woman in a tight red dress sneered. She's over 30 years old and still drifting around. Another woman weighed down by thick gold necklaces let out a dry, mocking laugh. That is Clarabelle's actual sister. I heard she got kicked out of the military for desertion. Ran away like a coward when things got too real. Trash like that just takes up space. I raised a plastic cup of tap water to my mouth. My throat was bone dry. I swallowed the lukewarm water and kept my eyes locked forward. Clarabelle glided over to her group of friends. The hem of her cream silk dress dragged briefly across the mud-stained toe of my tactical boot. She held a fresh glass of champagne, resting her left hand high on her collarbone so the overhead lights would catch the massive diamond on her finger. Instead of shutting down the vicious rumors about her own flesh and blood, Clarabelle let out a long, heavy sigh. She painted a look of deep, manufactured sorrow across her face. "Please do not be so harsh on her," Clarabelle said. Her voice dripped with fake sympathy. "She is pathetic, really. Our family has tried so hard to help her. We paid for therapists. We tried to get her a normal job." But her nature is just entirely selfish. She only knows how to run away when life gets hard. The absolute lie rolled out of her mouth like spilled oil. The women around her gasped in pity. They patted Clarabelle on the shoulder, praising her for being such a generous, burdened younger sister forced to deal with a toxic sibling. I lowered my plastic cup. I set it down on the wooden windowsill. My fingers curled over the edge of the wood, my fingernails digging into the varnish until the joints in my knuckles cracked. A large, heavy-set man separated himself from the crowd and stomped straight toward my corner. I recognized him. He was one of Arthur's local real estate partners. His face was flushed deep red, radiating the sour smell of cheap whiskey and cigar smoke. He stopped 2 feet in front of me and shoved a thick, meaty finger directly in my face. "You are an absolute disgrace," the fat man barked. Spit flew from his bottom lip. "You leave your unit to die in the dirt, and then you drag your pathetic self back here to leech off your father. You should not even be in this room. You are dirtying up Clarabelle's special night." The idle chatter around the room died instantly. Guests took a collective step back, forming a wide circle. They were waiting for me to break down. They wanted tears. They wanted me to run out the back door in shame. I looked past the fat man's shoulder. Arthur was standing right by the wet bar. He saw the entire confrontation. He made direct eye contact with me. And then my father slowly turned his back, reached for a silver pair of tongs, and picked up a square of sharp cheddar cheese. My own father stood there, chewing his food, letting a drunk stranger publicly execute his daughter. The fat man took another aggressive step forward. He raised his heavy hand, aiming to shove me hard in the chest. I did not flinch. I let my breathing drop. I shifted my weight, lowering my center of gravity into a solid combat stance. My right hand twitched, preparing to catch his wrist, snap the joint inward, and drop his heavy frame straight to the hardwood floor. But before his sweaty fingers could even brush the fabric of my jacket, a deafening noise shattered the room. Smash! A heavy crystal champagne flute was slammed down onto the marble countertop right next to the fat man's ear. The glass did not break, but the brutal, violent force of the impact sounded like a gunshot. The fat man jumped, ripping his hand back. He spun around, his flushed face suddenly draining of color. Ethan Maddox stood there. The Navy SEAL commander had materialized out of thin air. He stepped right into the gap between me and the drunk man. Ethan rolled his broad shoulders back, turning his body into a massive wall of solid muscle, completely cutting off the fat man's line of sight to me. The polite civilian smile was entirely gone. The look in the commander's eyes was pure, unadulterated violence. It was the dead, empty stare of a man holding a rifle, waiting for the exact right fraction of a second to squeeze the trigger. Arthur noticed the sudden drop in temperature. He tossed his cheese cube onto a passing waiter's tray and pushed his way through the gathered crowd of guests. Instead of throwing the drunk fat man out of the house for attacking his daughter, Arthur slipped between us. He patted the fat man on the shoulder, laughing off the aggression as if it were a harmless joke at a dive bar, and gently nudged him back into the crowd. Then Arthur turned to face Ethan. Arthur pasted on a thick, diplomatic smile. He reached out, fully intending to throw his arm around the shoulders of his future son-in-law to smooth things over. Ethan slapped Arthur's hand away. It was not a polite brush. It was a hard, sharp rejection. The physical block was so fast and so violent that the fake smile instantly melted right off Arthur's face. The entire room went dead silent. You could hear the ice melting in the cocktail glasses. Humiliated in front of his local business partners, Arthur scrambled to regain control of his own living room. He needed a scapegoat to deflect the tension. He needed someone to absorb the damage. He chose me. Arthur spun around. He pointed a stiff index finger directly at my face, jutting his chin out to establish dominance. Her? No, she is just a guest. A coward who abandoned her unit and ran. His voice was loud, bouncing off the high ceiling. He did not even look me in the eye as he delivered the execution. Best not to pay her any mind, Ethan. My father added his tone entirely casual. He was talking about me like I was a broken appliance sitting on his curb. Irresponsible trash like her, the military was right to kick her to the curb. That was the final stab. The kill shot from the man whose name was on my birth certificate. I did not move. I locked my jaw so tight the bones cracked. I did not blink, and I absolutely did not let a single tear breach the waterline of my eyes. This flesh has caught hot shrapnel in the middle of a burning street in Fallujah. I have pulled shrapnel out of my own leg without crying, but the cold casual sarcasm from my own flesh and blood tore through my chest worse than any bullet I ever took overseas. The SEAL commander did not smile. He did not laugh along with the nervous crowd. Ethan stepped forward. He reached out with his right hand and grabbed my wrist, intending to physically pull me behind his broad shoulders and shield me from the room. But the exact second his heavy fingers wrapped around my wrist, they accidentally brushed against the pale, jagged scar hidden under the cuff of my jacket. Under the blazing direct light of the crystal chandeliers, the brutal saw-toothed cut of the rusted winch cable was fully illuminated. The texture of torn muscle and survival was right there in the open. Ethan's entire body locked up. His muscles went completely rigid. The steady rhythm of his breathing hitched, catching dead in his throat. He snapped his head up. He looked directly into my eyes, not with pity, not with anger. It was absolute, unfiltered shock. The SEAL commander's voice trembled. It barely cut through the silence of the room. "Ma'am," he stuttered, his grip on my wrist tightening. Are you the Black Panther of the Marine Corps? Family is supposed to be the first line of defense, but sometimes they are the ones holding the sharpest knife. If you have ever had to quietly heal from a wound caused by your own flesh and blood, hit the like button on this video. Drop a comment below and just type, "I understand. You are not alone." Arthur frowned, his thick eyebrows pulled together in utter confusion. He looked at Ethan like the commander had just spoken a foreign language. "What the hell are you talking about, Ethan?" Arthur scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "She does not have a call sign. She is a desk clerk who could not handle the pressure." Ethan did not let go of my wrist. He slowly turned his head. He looked straight into the face of the man who was supposed to be his father-in-law. The dead, empty stare was back. But this time, a dark, heavy wave of pure combat hostility burned behind his eyes. "You!" Ethan's voice dropped an octave. It was sharp and lethal, cutting straight into the chest of the hypocrite standing in front of him. "What exactly do you know about that deployment that gives you the right to open your mouth and judge her?" Arthur physically recoiled. He took a stumbling step backward, the color completely draining from his face. He stammered, looking around the room for any kind of backup. I heard it from her sister," Arthur choked out. Ethan cut him off. The SEAL commander's voice roared through the living room like thunder. "Get Master Sergeant Miller out here right now." The crowd of expensive suits and silk dresses parted like dead water. From the far side of the wet bar, an older man stepped forward into the harsh light of the chandeliers. His hair was stark white, cut close to his scalp. Master Sergeant Miller. The guest of honor. Ethan's uncle. He walked with a heavy, deliberate limp. Pinned to the left breast of his tailored suit jacket was a stack of military commendations. With every slow, dragging step, the heavy metal of the medals clinked together. Clack, clack, clack. It sounded like a judge's gavel slamming down in a dead quiet courtroom. Arthur panicked. The color drained from his face. He scrambled forward, bowing his shoulders, trying to shrink his posture to look harmless. "Master Sergeant, please. This is just a silly family misunderstanding. Just sibling rivalry. Do not trouble yourself." Miller did not even blink at him. He walked right past Arthur like the man was a piece of cheap furniture. Miller stopped 2 feet in front of me. He leaned his heavy weight onto his thick wooden cane. His old, faded blue eyes narrowed into a fierce squint. He scanned the scarred line of my jaw, my squared shoulders, and the exposed, mangled skin on my wrist. "Commander Maddox." Miller's voice was deep, scraping like dry sandpaper across the silent room. "You called for me." Ethan did not take his eyes off my father, but he jutted his chin toward the crowd of open-mouthed guests hiding by the walls. "Master Sergeant," Ethan said, his voice cold and flat. "Please tell the civilians in this room what you know about Operation Meridian." The entire living room stopped breathing. Miller shifted his grip on the cane. He looked out at the crowd of soft, wealthy people with absolute disgust. "It was a suicide rescue mission," Miller said. He spoke slowly, making sure every single word landed like a brick. 3 years ago, a concrete structure collapsed on a joint task force in a hostile grid. The extraction order was given, but one female Marine officer refused the order to fall back. She stayed behind in the kill zone. She used her bare hands to drag a rusted industrial winch cable through burning concrete. She pulled 6 American special operators out of the rubble while the roof caved in on top of her. The ice in Arthur's glass cracked. Ethan kept his voice completely level. "Who gave you that intel, Master Sergeant?" Miller nodded, a sharp, definitive motion. "Colonel Harker. He said the brass tried to pin a Navy cross on her chest, but she refused the public ceremony. She kept her identity buried to protect the local assets who helped her survive the night. The colonel only knew her by one call sign: Black Panther. The only operator in that sector willing to trade her own life for her team." The blood drained completely out of Clarabelle's face. She turned a sickly pale white. She realized the spotlight was gone. The attention, the pity, the center stage, it was slipping through her fingers forever. She lunged forward, her arms flailing wildly. Her voice cracked into a shrill, hysterical shriek. "This old man is lying!" Clarabelle screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Miller. Her expensive makeup looked grotesque, stretched over her panicked face. "She is just a paper pusher. She is a coward who ran away. Everyone knows it. Do not listen to them." She spun around desperate. She reached out and dug her manicured nails into the sleeve of Ethan's jacket. "Ethan, baby, please. Kick her out. She's ruining our night." Ethan stopped. He looked down at the hand clawing at his sleeve. He did not yell. He did not strike her. He reached over with his right hand. He pinched Clarabelle's wrist between his thumb and index finger, gripping her like she was a diseased maggot pulled from a trash can. He squeezed just hard enough to make her gasp, peeled her fingers off his jacket, and shoved her backward. Clarabelle stumbled, her expensive heels catching on the Persian rug, almost crashing into the coffee table. Her rich friends pressed their backs against the wall. Nobody said a word. Nobody moved to help her. Arthur clutched his chest, gasping for air like a dying fish, his facade utterly destroyed. Ethan stepped forward, cutting off the space between me and the rest of the room. He positioned his body to completely shield me from the toxic wreckage of the Butler family. The distance between us evaporated. It was no longer a civilian living room. It was the sacred, isolated space shared only by 2 soldiers who knew the exact smell of a burning convoy. Ethan looked straight into my eyes. His voice echoed across the massive, silent room. There was zero doubt left in his tone, only absolute, rigid military respect. "Major Alicia Butler." He squared his shoulders. "Were you part of Operation Meridian?" I did not justify my existence. I did not waste my breath explaining the blood I shed to the parasites cowering behind him. I stood at strict attention. I kept my chin high. I looked directly into the SEAL commander's eyes, and I gave him one single nod. The exact second my nod fell, the entire atmospheric pressure in the living room shifted. It happened in a fraction of a heartbeat. Ethan Maddox did not just stand up straighter. His civilian facade burned away entirely, leaving nothing but a Tier 1 operator in its place. He rolled his broad shoulders back, expanding his chest to its absolute maximum capacity. His spine snapped straight, locking rigid as a steel blade. He took a deliberate half-step backward, creating a clear, respectful perimeter between us. Crack! His heavy leather heels slammed together. The sharp, violent sound of the boot drop cut through the dead silence of the engagement party like a rifle shot. Ethan's right arm snapped up in a flawless tight arc. The edge of his hand locked firmly against his right temple. Right there, standing under the blazing crystal chandeliers of a disgustingly wealthy civilian living room, the Navy SEAL commander threw a full, rigid military salute directly at the woman his future family had just called a coward. He was not alone. Directly behind him, Master Sergeant Miller executed the exact same motion. Clack! The old man's boots hit the hardwood. He stood at perfect attention despite his bad leg, his hand glued to his brow, his chest heavy with combat medals. "Good evening, Major." Ethan's voice was a low, heavy rumble. It echoed through the room with absolute, unquestionable reverence. Smash! The crystal champagne flute slipped right through Clarabelle's trembling fingers. It hit the marble floor and exploded into jagged shrapnel. Foaming wine splashed all over her bare calves, soaking into her designer heels and ruining the expensive Persian rug. She did not even blink. Her mouth hung open, her perfectly contoured face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Arthur physically stumbled backward. His hip slammed hard against the sharp edge of the mahogany coffee table. He gripped the wood with white knuckles just to keep his balance. His eyes bulged out of his skull. For 10 long years, Arthur Butler had meticulously built a lie, dragging my name through the mud to make his youngest daughter look like gold to his high society friends. Now that entire wall of garbage was collapsing in real time, burying him alive in front of his most important business partners. Ethan held the salute for 3 full seconds, a sign of ultimate respect. Then he dropped his hand, snapping it back to his side, and pivoted sharply on his heel. He faced the crowd of rich, gaping civilians. The silence in the room was suffocating. He pointed a thick, steady finger directly at me. "If she was not in that grid..." Ethan barked, his voice filling every dark corner of the room. "Half of my task force would have come home on a cargo plane in black body bags." The fat man who had tried to grab me earlier physically shrank against the wall. Ethan took a step forward, sweeping his gaze across the terrified guests. She refused a public medal pinning because she wanted to protect the local intelligence assets who risked their necks to keep us alive. Meridian was not a desertion. It was a suicide rescue. Ethan turned his sights on my father. He advanced, closing the distance. Arthur pressed his back against the wet bar, knocking over a row of shot glasses. "She is the only reason my men are breathing American air today." Ethan snarled, his voice vibrating with lethal intensity. "And the people in this room, the people who just stood here and stomped on her name, you are not even fit to shine her combat boots." Several women in the crowd gasped, lifting their hands to cover their mouths. The disgusted, judgmental glares they had been throwing at me all night suddenly flipped direction. Every single pair of eyes in the room turned into daggers, aiming straight at Arthur and Clarabelle. The social execution had officially reversed. Arthur threw both his hands up in the air. He was sweating profusely, his face pale and slick. He looked pathetic. A cornered rat trying to negotiate with a firing squad. "Ethan, please, you have to understand," Arthur pleaded, his voice cracked high and weak. "I was just trying to keep the peace in this house. Clarabelle is fragile. She needed the confidence. I had to protect her from feeling inadequate." Ethan let out a short, dry laugh. It was a terrifying, hollow sound that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "You protected her," Ethan repeated, stepping right into Arthur's personal space. "You chose to completely destroy the honor of a Marine of your own flesh and blood just to cover up how pathetic the youngest one is." Ethan reached into the inside breast pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out a small square velvet box. The engagement ring. The golden ticket Arthur had been banking on to elevate his family's social status and secure his financial future. Ethan did not hand it back politely. He threw it. The velvet box hit the solid marble countertop with a heavy final thud. It slid rapidly across the smooth stone, knocking over a crystal decanter before slamming hard into a silver ice bucket. "I am not marrying into a house full of traitors," Ethan said. The room hung in a state of suspended animation. Then the narcissistic rage finally broke the silence. There was no apology. There was no sudden realization of guilt or shame for lying about a military rescue. Clarabelle drove the sharp heel of her designer stiletto directly into the shattered glass of her champagne flute. The broken crystal ground into the expensive Persian rug with a sickening, violent crunch. "This was supposed to be my night," Clarabelle screamed. Her voice was not sad or broken. It was a high, shrill shriek of pure, unhinged entitlement. She clawed at the skirt of her cream silk dress, violently wrinkling the expensive fabric. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my face. Black mascara ran down her cheeks in thick, ugly streaks. "Why do you always have to show up and ruin my life? You ruin absolutely everything you touch." It was the ultimate rot of a spoiled child exposed to the open air. She did not feel an ounce of remorse for labeling her own sister a deserter. She did not care that I had nearly bled to death under a collapsed concrete building. She was simply rabid that someone else had stolen the spotlight. The small cluster of her wealthy, judgmental friends took a collective step backward. The fake pity they felt for her 5 minutes ago completely evaporated. They looked at Clarabelle with raw, unfiltered disgust. They were backing away from a rabid animal, realizing the sweet, burdened younger sister routine was nothing but a psychotic mask. Arthur snapped out of his frozen shock. He saw his golden ticket burning to the ground right in front of him. He lunged forward. His hands reached out, grasping desperately at the lapels of Ethan's tailored suit jacket. "Ethan, wait. Please listen to me. You do not understand," Arthur begged. His face was slick with greasy sweat. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his brand new cashmere sweater. "This house has pressures, financial expectations. I only did it to protect the family reputation. Clarabelle needed the confidence to secure her business. She needs stability. I had to protect her. You understand how the real world works." Ethan did not argue. He brought his arms up hard, breaking Arthur's grip in a split second, and shoved the older man backward. The physical force sent my father stumbling across the hardwood floor. His back hit the wooden edge of the wet bar with a heavy, painful thud. "Protect," Ethan snarled. He spat the word out like it was poison on his tongue. He stared down at Arthur with a level of cold contempt usually reserved for enemy combatants. "You stole the combat record of a Marine. You crushed the honor of your own flesh and blood just to cover up the pathetic, hollow reality of this house. You treat your children like bank accounts and social props. A man like you does not even deserve to be called a father." On the other side of the living room, the Maddox family stood up in perfect silent unison. Master Sergeant Miller did not say a single word. He simply turned around. The heavy wooden tip of his cane struck the hardwood floor. Thwack! He led the entire groom side of the room straight toward the front hallway. They moved with quiet military precision. They did not wave. They did not offer a polite goodbye. They did not even look at the Butler family on their way out. Ethan looked down at Clarabelle. She had collapsed onto her knees, sobbing violently, her hands tearing at the woven fibers of the rug. "I would rather deploy to a hostile combat zone completely barehanded than marry a ruthless traitor like you," Ethan said. His voice was dead and hollow. He turned his back on her. The small velvet box holding the diamond engagement ring sat abandoned on the cold marble counter. It was the absolute end of the gold mine Arthur had spent 10 years trying to dig up. Ethan walked down the hall. The heavy oak front door slammed shut. The noise echoed through the high ceilings like a vault locking permanently. The engagement party had officially turned into a graveyard. Panic set in immediately. Uncle Greg and the rest of the local business partners quietly shuffled out the back doors. They moved fast, keeping their heads down, desperate to avoid the blast radius of Arthur's ruined reputation. Not a single person dared to make eye contact with me. Arthur slumped down to the floor, burying his face in his hands. He muttered useless broken sentences to himself, mourning his lost status. I stood perfectly still in the corner. I scanned the wreckage of the living room. I did not smile. I did not feel the need to scream, demand an apology, or ask for the thousands of dollars he had stolen from my college fund. Gloating is for weak people who need outside validation. I did not need anything from these people ever again. They were completely irrelevant. They were ghosts in my perimeter. I pushed my shoulders off the cold plaster wall. I stepped forward. I walked with a steady, heavy, measured pace directly through the center of the living room. Earlier today, Arthur had banished me to the back door. He had ordered me to stay off the new carpets because the dirt on my boots was offensive to his high-class image. I did not walk around the edges of the room. I walked dead center. The thick, mud-caked rubber treads of my tactical boots drove deep into the pristine, expensive white carpet. I left a trail of dried earth and dirt right through the middle of Arthur's ruined kingdom. I did not look back at the crying woman on the floor. I did not look at the broken man by the bar. I walked straight past them, put my hand on the wooden banister, and started walking up the stairs to pack my gear. Early the next morning, thick gray fog blanketed the Mendocino coastline. The white clapboard house sat in an eerie, suffocating silence. It was the heavy, dead quiet of guilty people hiding in their bedrooms, terrified to face the daylight. I woke up long before the sun broke through the coastal marine layer. The air in my old bedroom felt stale and suffocating. There was not much to pack. My heavy canvas duffel bag already held everything I owned. I grabbed the thick metal zipper and pulled it shut. The harsh scraping sound of the teeth locking together echoed loudly in the quiet room. I slung the heavy strap over my right shoulder. I did not bother looking back at the massive closet filled with Clarabelle's designer clothes. The objective was fully cleared. The hostile elements had self-destructed. There was absolutely no tactical reason to hold this position for another second. I walked downstairs. The living room was still a disaster zone. The shattered remains of the crystal champagne flute were still ground into the Persian rug. The expensive velvet ring box sat untouched next to the ice bucket. I did not take the back door this time. I walked straight down the main hallway, unlocked the deadbolt, and pushed the heavy oak front door open. The freezing Pacific air hit my face instantly. My breath plumed into a thin cloud of white smoke. I stopped on the top step of the porch. Ethan Maddox was standing at the end of the driveway. He was leaning his broad shoulders against the side panel of a dark, heavy-duty pickup truck. He wore a faded canvas jacket, a paper coffee cup held loosely in his right hand. He was not there to cause a scene. He was just waiting. When Ethan saw me step out of the house, he pushed off the side of the truck. He stood up straight. There was zero awkwardness between us, just the quiet mutual understanding of two people who know exactly how much blood the other has seen. "Major," Ethan said. His voice was a low, steady rumble in the cold morning air. "Just wanted to make sure you got out of this grid safely." It was a simple statement, but it carried the weight of absolute respect. He was treating my departure like an extraction from a hostile zone. I adjusted the heavy canvas strap on my shoulder. "I can handle myself, Commander, but I appreciate what you did in there last night." Ethan shook his head. He took a slow sip of his black coffee. "Do not thank me. My team and I are the ones who owe you the thanks." He raised the paper cup slightly in a final informal salute. "Safe travels, Black Panther." He opened the door of his truck, climbed into the cab, and drove away, disappearing into the heavy coastal fog. I walked across the damp gravel driveway toward my beat-up SUV. I threw the heavy duffel bag into the trunk. The rusted hinges groaned as I slammed the rear hatch shut. The loud metallic bang echoed across the quiet property. Behind me, the wooden front door of the house creaked open. I turned around. Arthur was standing in the doorway. He was wearing a wrinkled pair of gray pajamas. His shoulders were slumped forward, and the bags under his eyes were dark and heavy. He looked like he had aged 10 full years in a single night. His hands gripped the wooden door frame, tight, his knuckles white. He stood entirely inside the house. He did not take a single step out onto the porch. Clarabelle was nowhere to be seen. She was likely buried under her expensive duvet covers, eating herself alive with the shame of losing her golden ticket. Arthur opened his mouth. His lips trembled. He looked at me standing 30 feet away by my truck. "Alicia, His voice cracked. It was a weak, pathetic sound. A hollow apology caught dead in the throat of a complete coward who did not have the spine to take responsibility for his own actions. He had stolen my college fund. He had allowed his business partners to call me a deserter. He had called me a piece of trash to my face. And now, standing in the ruins of his social climbing, he could not even force out the words, "I am sorry." I stood by the rear tire of my SUV. I looked straight into the eyes of the man who shared my DNA. I did not scream at him. I did not demand the thousands of dollars he had stolen from me a decade ago. Dragging him into a courtroom would only tether me to this toxic swamp for another 5 years. Engaging with him in any way was a complete waste of ammunition. I looked at him and I let out a short, cold exhale through my nose. I pulled the corner of my mouth up into a faint, dead smirk. It was a smile sharp enough to slice glass. It was the absolute final severing of our bloodline. I turned my back on him. I pulled open the heavy steel door of my SUV and climbed into the driver's seat. I did not offer a goodbye. I did not look at him in the rearview mirror. I shoved the metal key into the ignition and twisted it hard. The heavy V8 engine roared to life. The deep, guttural growl of the exhaust completely swallowed the pathetic silence of the White House. I grabbed the gear shift, yanked it into drive, and slammed my boot down on the gas pedal. The heavy rubber tires of my SUV dug hard into the loose gravel. I slammed my heavy boot down on the gas pedal. Rocks and dirt kicked up in a violent rattling cloud, spraying the pristine front porch of the white clapboard house. I did not care about the paint job. I looked up at the rearview mirror. The house. My psychological prison for 32 years. It shrank rapidly in the glass, getting smaller and smaller until it completely vanished behind a thick line of coastal pine trees. The exact second the house dropped out of my line of sight, a massive crushing weight shattered inside my chest. It felt like spitting out a mouthful of blood and finally taking a clean, deep breath. I gripped the leather steering wheel. My knuckles lost their rigid white knuckle tension. The blood pumping through Arthur and Clarabelle's veins meant absolutely nothing to me anymore. DNA is just a biological accident, a random roll of the dice. Family is not the people who share your last name while they pick your pockets. Family is the people wearing the same uniform. The ones willing to drag themselves through burning concrete and jagged steel just to keep you breathing. The ones who throw a sharp salute in a room full of cowards. I merged onto the Pacific Coast Highway. The black asphalt stretched out wide and empty along the cliffs. I took my right hand off the steering wheel and reached up to the chest pocket of my faded field jacket. I grabbed the heavy metal zipper and pulled it down. I reached inside and pulled out the folded, yellowed bank receipt, the 10-year-old evidence of a stolen college fund. I held the paper up, pinning it against the steering wheel with my thumb. I could drive straight to a lawyer's office in the city. I could file a massive civil lawsuit against Arthur. I could drag him through the dirt in a public courtroom, freeze his remaining assets, and legally kick him out onto the street. He deserved it. But doing that meant I would have to see his pathetic face again. It meant I would have to sit in a sterile room and listen to him lie under oath. It meant staying chained to the toxic swamp of the Butler family for another 5 years of legal warfare. I refused to be their victim anymore. I refused to play their twisted game. I pinched the top edge of the thick paper between my fingers. I pulled my hands apart. Right! The sound of the paper tearing in half was incredibly loud in the quiet cab of the SUV. I stacked the two halves together. I tore them again. Quarters, then eighths. The harsh scratching sound of the ripping paper was the most satisfying thing I'd heard in a decade. I reached over and hit the window switch. The heavy glass rolled down. The freezing Pacific headwind violently rushed into the cab, whipping my hair across my face. It carried the sharp, biting smell of saltwater, wet asphalt, and total freedom. I held my closed fist out the open window. The wind hammered against my knuckles. They owed me a childhood. They owed me 3 years of double shifts at a greasy diner. They owed me hazard pay earned in a hostile combat zone. They owed me a real apology. But I was writing off the debt, every single cent. I opened my hand. The violent coastal wind instantly snatched the tiny scraps of torn paper from my palm. The pieces flew out into the gray morning air, scattering wildly behind the truck like dirty snow disappearing over the edge of the rocky bluff. Leaving them alone was not a surrender. It was a calculated execution. I was leaving them to rot in their own public humiliation. Arthur's business partners would turn their backs on him. Clarabelle's rich friends would cut her out of their social circles. Their fake high society facade was completely dead. That was a far more brutal punishment than anything a judge could ever hand down. The highway curved sharply along the coastline. The sun finally breached the dark horizon, climbing up from the edge of the ocean. A massive wave of brilliant, blinding gold light flooded over the dark water. The morning sun punched straight through the windshield of the SUV, washing the cold interior in intense heat. I kept my left hand resting on the open window frame. The harsh sunlight hit the pale, jagged scar running across my wrist. For years, Clarabelle had demanded I keep it hidden under long sleeves so I would not ruin her aesthetic. I looked down at the ruined flesh. It was not ugly. It was a heavy, hard-earned piece of iron, the permanent receipt of a survivor. I looked back up at the empty highway stretching out for hundreds of miles. I pressed my heavy tactical boot all the way down to the floorboards. The V8 engine roared, vibrating through the steel frame of the truck, drowning out the sound of the crashing waves. I am a soldier. And a soldier never asks for permission to be free. True freedom is when you stop asking for permission from the people who trampled on you to finally live your life. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel to support me, and comment below with the bravest decision you ever made to cut toxic people out of your life.